Bulawanaka and welcome to For the Record. I'm Edwin Nand. Today is World Media Freedom Day. Let's take a moment to reflect on the work of journalists. In different parts of the world, reporters are being killed in war zones. Others are being attacked by criminal organizations for their reporting. And in the most recent incident, Charlie Hebdo, a satirical magazine in France, was attacked by gun-wielding terrorists who killed 11 employees. It's a dangerous time to be a journalist. And on this backdrop, we have Fiji, where things aren't volatile, but the government's media decree has been met with some criticism and silent opposition. Journalists have repeatedly been told, however, that they are free to report, just be balanced and accurate. Let me now introduce you to our guests this evening. We have with us Ricardo Morris, the president of the Fijian Media Association, and joining us also tonight is the chairperson of the Media Industry Development Authority, Ashwin Raj. And we're also welcome tonight the president of the Pacific Island News Association, Moses Stevens. That is our panel of guests tonight. Joining me on the question panel is Joshua Tuere from the Fiji Sun. Gentlemen, good evening, and thank you all for being here. As I said, interesting times for the media industry around the world, but let's try and, as much as possible, stick to Fiji and Pacific. Moses representing the Pacific Islands fraternity of the media. First question, there is an elephant in the room, that being MIDA and the Fiji media, and more specifically the Fijian Media Association. Where is the middle ground? That's to the two gentlemen. Ricardo, let you have the first word.
Yes, I mean, we all know there are regulations in place. There's the media decree in place, and that's what we've been, as a media, working under since 2010. And I think we have come to a stage where the media industry has matured in some ways. We've finally been able to organize ourselves, establish an association, which we did in April last year, and this is our second World Media Freedom Day, and it hasn't been easy. There has been some challenges, but we've tried to work with the Media Authority as best we can to address some of the issues that have come up. And I think the authority is open to hearing from the industry.
Ashwin?
What has been considered as the dissonance between the Media Industry Development Authority and the media industry itself, I would respectfully submit, is not something which is peculiar to Fiji alone. I think this is a larger problem that we are facing right now, which is the delicate dance between the call for ethics and self-reflexivity and the freedom of expression. And I think that's a fundamental sort of kind of seemingly diabolically opposed political tension that seems to be animating discussions around press freedom and freedom of expression globally. So if you look at the proliferation of that kind of political consciousness around freedom of expression, and particularly in places where there's overt sort of kind of brutality and repression of the press, in the wake of the Arab Springs and all of that, people have also taken to other platforms as well. For instance, the social media, because the laws are very draconian. Now, in Fiji, on the other hand, I think, and I have to acknowledge that the media, is operating within a complexity of constraints, and we must acknowledge that. At the same time, I think we have to take full cognizance of the fact that our industry has been able to vocalize what appears to be the kind of issues afflicting them, and I think creating that kind of space is a very, very strong indication that there is a possibility of constructive engagement.
At this point, if I can just bring Moses, you into this conversation, you sort of have an outsider's perspective. You can see from the outside what is going on and how the environment is being shaped in Fiji right now. What is Pina's perspective of what's going on in Fiji right now?
I think to say in one word is healthy. I'm saying it's healthy because at least Fiji is starting off somewhere. It's the beginning of the working relationship between the media industry, government, and the civil society. If we look at, you say, what's the middle ground? What's the middle ground? I think the people that we serve. We, the media, and the government needs to dialogue and negotiate. What we are talking about, are we serving the people? Are we serving our people? So this is the common ground, and I keep reminding myself what the Honorable Prime Minister Bainimarama said at the Pacific Harbour Summit, that I don't want the media to be pro-government. I want the media in Fiji to be pro-Fiji. That's the people. And I think if we come up with any sort of legislation or regulation, we need to be thinking of, it's not the industry and the government. Do we have that in place to serve the people better? How do we allow the people to access information? So from an outside perspective, and for me, like, I've always stand for what is going on in Fiji, because through this, Fiji has become stronger. They've stood up and they have launched the Media Association. Those people who have been critical, they're fragmented still. What are they doing? You know, we should be learning from what's happening in Fiji, engaging with the government. Yes, we are aware of what is in place, but how can we organize ourselves? We don't let these things pressurize us, and who will be the victims? Only the people. And when we do that, the government learn from where we're coming from. We're learning from each other, and the government are the leaders. They are listeners, and they do listen to us, even though they may be putting up some things that we maybe see as barriers, but they do listen to the media. With the experience where I come from in Vanuatu, that has been the case, and I think that is why I'm saying that it's healthy in Fiji. What's happening in Fiji is healthy because at least they're starting somewhere.
You made some interesting comments earlier in the day during your address at USP when you talked about journalists needed to report and not instigate or create. How do you take that approach, especially when it comes to issues, say, for example, gender-based violence, where I'm sitting at the as a senior editor wanting to instigate and create discussion about gender-based violence, which I think the reality is hasn't been addressed appropriately because of the cultural prisms we are in. How would you?
That is why I've said that we have to be very careful on the concepts that being implanted upon us from outside, because we as a local media, we know our people best, we know our cultures best, and we know how to communicate in our traditional way, that we're not really suppressing information, but we have a way of going around things and still tell the story. And I think, again, engaging and dialoguing with those advocating the gender issues, the media association, the national media associations need to be engaging with them. They need to understand our role, how we do things, why we need to tell the stories, and why we can't tell the stories, and also talk to the society, the community, like, okay, this is the cultural thing, but this issue is a problem to the society, or whatever. So it needs those three parties, tripartite scenario, that there needs to be an understanding of the role that the media plays, the civil society, those involved, and us in the media, because the society cannot understand if we in the media don't play a role by advocating our role and duty and responsibility. That is why PINA has been saying that we must be responsible.
All right, gentlemen, on that note, we have to take a break. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about gender equality, and one of the themes for this year's World Media Freedom Day is, in fact, gender equality in the media, in reporting and highlighting issues. I suppose at this point, I have to point out that I may have failed in this regard tonight, because our entire panel is made up of men. By the first point, I myself have not been able to live up to the theme for this year, and my apologies. We will endeavor to address this in the future. But carrying on with discussions, gender equality and balancing the needs and priorities of a newsroom with the needs and priorities of certain sectors or portions of the society. Moses made some good points. How would a newsroom treat this? Gender equality.
Well, I think the theme this year, that particular theme on the addressing the gender imbalance within the media, talks about the decision-making positions in the media and how not many women globally are in those positions. But I think for Fiji, we are a good example of, we have quite a few women in top positions, but we could always do better. So I think addressing the gender imbalance involves that addressing, promoting more women, putting more women into decision-making positions within the newsrooms, and then that will have a flow-on effect. And the other side of it is reporters addressing gender issues in their own reporting. So I think they need to, there's always room to improve our own understanding of the dynamics involved in gender violence, and I think if we start with our own institutions and bring more women in, that'll be a start in understanding the entire range of dynamics involved in violence and gender violence specifically.
Ashwin, is the Fiji media giving due credit to gender issues?
No, and the reason being that I think that gender is a far more complex terrain than simply having men and women on a table, which is why I wanted to correct you, Edwin, quite respectfully, that there's a fundamental difference between sex and gender. So we can have 5 men on this table, but our gendered proclivities might be very plural, which we don't know about. So what I'm saying is that the media can play a fundamental role in terms of denaturalizing some of our very, very essentialist positions about gender. That's the first thing. The other thing is that we need to have some very, very robust discussions around the question of gendered violence, because there's a stereotype about gender-based violence as well. And so the fundamental difference is that we tend to focus a lot on physical violence, but then there's violence of the epistemic kind as well. And I think, which might not necessarily translate into physical violence, but it still hurts people. So one of the things we need to do is think about the ways in which the media can in fact open up that space for us to have a much more inclusive and a robust discussion around gender first, and then the question of violence and what constitutes violence, right? Because there's violence of non-violence too. And then we bring the whole thing together to gender-based violence. So to me, it's a very, very complex ratio. Now, the other thing is that when we think about gender, the question of gender and gender-based violence and gender equality, and the media can play a fundamental role as an instrument of social cohesion and a voice of reason. Let me give you a wonderful example. For the longest time, if you look at 2006 and all of that, I mean, if you look at the Fiji Women's Crisis Center, I mean, they've been doing some remarkable work on the question of gender violence, right? Here's an active NGO that has been doing a lot of work. Then we have a very impressive Minister for Women, under the current administration. And they together have been doing some wonderful work in the area of shelters and so on and so forth. For the longest time, the media has, focused a lot on the divisions between NGOs and government and, in the backdrop of the call for democracy and all of that. Let's start focusing on the ways in which these are some of the areas where, you can have some constructive engagement. And I think the media can play a fundamental role in promoting that, in trying to see the ways in which civil society organizations, state actors, and the media can actually work on a single platform in terms of, because the concern is common and the goal is collective. So that's another way in which the media can play a fundamental role. The third thing is the media exercising reflexivity on its own. Remember, we haven't had that kind of robust discussion about what's in our Bill of Rights. And I think the media needs to do a lot of work in terms of promoting what is in the Bill of Rights of our Constitution, which basically sort of, a very, very salutary Bill of Rights, I have to say, because of the inclusion of SOGI, right? sexual identity, gender expression, so on and so forth, is very, progressive compared to many other, constitutional jurisdictions. What can the media do in terms of promoting our understanding of SOGI matters? And again, you can see the ways in which the media can play a much bigger role here in terms of raising that kind of consciousness, Edwin. So it's not simply about saying, well, 78% of our women live in violence. Let us try and sort of deconstruct what that 78% means. And violence is also something where the media, needs to begin to deconstruct the binary opposition between private and public. Because domestic violence has been sort of kind of stereotypically thought as something which is in the domain of the private. And so let's start thinking about gender-based violence in, say, for instance, the area of the economy, the militarization of the economy. Let's start looking at the ways in which the media can play a fundamental role in educating the other ideological state apparatuses that have monopoly over violence. For instance, the police, the education sector, the military. Then you look at the question of the church and all of that. And so one begins to kind of like decouple it from the intimacies of the private and the domestic sphere and begin to see all these other questions. You'll begin to see that gender is a very, very complex terrain, and a lot more work can be done in this field, and the media, I think, can be the voice of reason.
What do you think the media has been restrained, so to speak? Is it the cultural prisms that hold them back, or is it ignorance or lack of training?
I think the problem is far more insidious. If you look at, for instance, advertising, I've had to call some, certain Hindi radio stations and talk to them about certain ads, this is several months ago, that they were running, which I found essentially to be homophobic. And, they said to me, oh, that wasn't the intent, we're not homophobic, but trust me, I know the business of gender. And I had to sort of kind of, write at length as to why I think this thing is homophobic. Because, why I'm saying it's insidious is because it works around seemingly banal things like advertising, where everybody laughs. Yeah. And we laugh at ourselves. But then we're laughing at other people too, who become the subject of incrimination. And so I think that we need to sort of kind of start looking at the question of ethics in a much more serious sense.
And Ashwin, I'm going to have to pause you there.
Sure.
It's time for another break. We'll be back shortly. Welcome back. We're talking about World Media Freedom Day, which happens to be today, and we'll carry on with discussions. If I may guide discussions now back onto the issue of the environment of reporting in Fiji. Ever since the media decree has come about in 2010, there's been talk, there's been discussion that reporters don't feel as free and uninhibited to report as they would wish. Ricardo, I would like to get the views of the FMA, because you represent local reporters, people who work in the industry day in, day out. Is that true? Do reporters still feel that fear, and do they still practice that self-censorship?
Well, I think it's fair to say that is now fading away, but I can't say for individual journalists, but in the years leading up to the election, there were issues, and we all know about the various issues that presented itself with media freedoms, people complaining about being intimidated, threatened. But I think towards the election last year, in the build-up to the election and the campaign coverage, you could see while individual reporters may still have felt a bit of apprehension, generally, we could see journalists and their companies and their publications and broadcasts taking, steps further. So steps further compared to the previous year. So stories that you'd never see previously started to come out, even Fiji Broadcasting with, always being labeled the state broadcaster and the government broadcaster, came out with quite a few critical stories which showed that there have been some improvements. What like everything else, there's always room for improvement. I mean, now that we've come around the corner of the elections and we're now moving, we have an elected parliament, I think now much more critical coverage of parliament, must take place. And personally, I think a lot more could be done, especially in the, in examining the workings of parliament and explaining it to the people. We have it being broadcast live, but that's where the role of journalists and the editors come in, is in explaining and interpreting things that go on. So, I mean, I wouldn't say that it's completely, that we have done 180 degrees, but I think that we have made a few important steps.
A couple of things that I'd like to pick on. Do you feel that the industry has lost a lot of its experienced reporters, journalists in the last few years, simply because they decided it wasn't worth it, let's just move on?
Yeah, I mean, that's an observation that is accurate. A lot of senior media people have moved on to other jobs in the NGO sectors, migrated overseas. So that brain drain, has had an effect on the media, and you have a lot of the journalists, the majority of the journalists covering last year's elections. That was the first time they were ever covering an election. So, before we come down too hard on all, the journalists that are working now, I think we need to understand where they've come from. A lot of them were quite young in 2006 when things changed. So it's up to those of us who are left in the industry now, working together to help guide them and show them that there are other ways, that there are other ways. Journalism is not, it's just not a two-dimensional thing. So I think it's up to us that are left here now to continue guiding these journalists in the direction that, that they should take.
One of the things Ashwin referred to earlier was the complexities of the status quo, and Fiji Sun has taken an editorial stance to question the penalties, possible penalties that could be incurred by a journalist. What's the way forward for that? We're trying to create a discussion, a review, because I don't know if Ricardo wants to add. It does feature at the back of journalists' minds.
May I respond? So, I'm the first one to acknowledge that the industry has been operating within a complexity of constraints. And in particular, the penal liabilities attached to the Media Industry Development Decree of 2010 is the one that is the bone of contention. I think that a whole lot of people are in consonance with my own view that if you look at the code of ethics, it's a very nuanced code of ethics, and that given the nature of complaints, and we receive a lot of complaints. I mean, MIDA, given its initial sort of setup, is now sort of kind of morphed into a completely different sort of kind of space where we receive so many complaints, and it's from people with very political proclivities, and it's become very apparent that there is a necessity for an authority like that, to deal with matters of sort of transgression. But at the same time, I think that I want to go back. I want to go back and talk about the ways in which we can work around the decree, because I don't have the authority to change the decree. But for the last 3 years that I've been the chairman of the Media Industry Development Authority, 2+ years, right? One of the things I've actually tried to do is, bring disparate actors onto the table for discussion. I've been absolutely honest. I'm not a very popular person, because sometimes when you speak truth to power, you don't necessarily sort of say the kind of things that are palatable. But the important thing has been that whatever our differences are, we need to sort of kind of lay it out on the table. The one thing that I've said to the media all the time is make reason-based intervention. Substantiate your claims, and there is nothing that can stop you from reporting, because the job of the media is to expose, is to engender an ethos of accountability, transparency, and strengthening institutions of governance. Yet at the same time, what I'm also saying is that if the media is going to go out and be the watchdog of society, then the media needs to be held accountable too. And it's a two-way process, yeah? So, the media industry cannot occupy an indomitable moral plateau from which they're going to go out and judge. The same thing applies to MIDA as well. For instance, the tension that Fiji Sun and MIDA had, where I had to retract because I had acted unilaterally, is something that needs to be done, because checks and balances in the system are extremely important. So, for instance, if MIDA makes a decision which the media industry feels that is troubling, can always take it to the media tribunal. And I think that those kind of instruments are so important. And to work around the question of the hefty fines and the imprisonment provisions, I've always said that as far as I'm concerned, these penal liabilities won't achieve anything.
Ashwin, I'm going to have to pause you there once more. We've come to the end of the segment. Okay. We'll be right back.
Okay.
Welcome back. We're talking about World Media Freedom Day. Before the break, Ricardo, I want to get your reaction to what Ashwin was saying about working around the decree. Is it easy to do? Because I understand it's a constant thought in the back of every reporter's mind, the penalties.
Yes, and I think, there's nothing we can do right now. It's there, it's in place. So I think the first step is understanding it, reading it thoroughly, reading the decree thoroughly, understanding its provisions, and you'll be able to see the limits you can take with certain things. But you're right, with many young journalists, the first thing they ask about is the penalties and what happens if I breach the decree. Thankfully, no one has yet copped any of the penalties. But, that's always a point of discussion about what could possibly happen if you breach the decree with the, fines for individual journalists, editors, publishers, and their companies. So I think that's where the question about a review, asking for a review of those portions of the decree that, that we know are counterproductive to what we're trying to do. Because on the one hand, you're trying to promote an open and a free media, a media that's able to hold up a mirror to society without fear or favor. But on the other hand, you have thoughts of what would happen if you breach the decree.
I'd like to come back to the issue of the review of the decree, but very quickly, Moses, for PINA, would you take an opinion? Does the association have an opinion on whether the media should be self-regulating or government-regulated vis-a-vis the media decree?
Is like I said earlier in the beginning, that what's happening in Fiji is healthy as far as PINA is concerned. It's like a jigsaw puzzle here, and we're trying to put the pieces into place, and it's practically happening in Fiji. And now that the Media Association has been set up, and like Ashwin said, if there's an ongoing issue that the members are feeling that it's costing them, it's hindering their practice, then it should be brought to the table now. I spoke of strengthening leadership within our national media associations, and that means these leaders should be engaging with the authorities that have been set up to discuss issues that the members are facing and thinking. Sometimes we talk about these issues during Media Freedom Days or on a media, then there's nothing done about sitting down and actually talking about them over coffee or a tanoa or something somewhere. And because we have to do things the island way. We have to engage. We have to dialogue and talk about this. Oh, maybe. And maybe the authority can see some senses in there and seeing that we are working together into producing something good. In 2009, when closing the inaugural Pacific Media Summit in Port Vila, the then head of state, Kalkot Matas Kelekele, questioned the media is labeled as the watchdog of the society. but who scrutinizes the media? And for me, I took that on board. That was the year that I was elected president for the first time. And I believe very strongly that we need to develop national mechanisms in place to handle this kind of issues that have been brought up in our industry. We need to be responsible. And PINA wants to create a media-friendly environment in the Pacific, meaning we're open to dialogue with our governments, with dialogue members of the civil society, with the NGOs, regarding the work that we do. If they're not happy about anything that we do, we don't go out and issue press releases to Radio Australia or whatever. But we come and talk to our national media association, say, look, we don't agree to what your members are doing. And then this is our country. We have to move together. The media industry is part of the whole governance system, the whole moving forward. And so we need to be seeing that happening. And we in Vanuatu, for example, we have worked with the government, the National Media Association. They have established a National Media Code of Ethics for the first time since 1980. And now we're working on a Freedom of Information Bill, Right to Information Bill. So it's the media engaging with the government and in collaboration with the members of the civil society and the NGOs. So everyone is working together.
Yeah.
So this is why I said PINA is encouraged that the Media Council, the Media Association of Fiji has been established. All these issues that we are discussing now should be on the table between the Media Association and Ashwin's office and discuss them. And then we come here to talk about how we deal with them. Because Pacific Island, other member countries of PINA are looking at Fiji now. Will they pull through? And it's a challenge. And if you succeed, we will come and adopt from you. And this is where I said the bigger countries, the media industries like Fiji and Papua New Guinea are so significant in developing and establishing a stronger and friendly and responsible media in the Pacific. So things that are happening in the bigger neighbors, it will impact on us as well. So in that case, I say this is healthy. Again, this is healthy. At least you are progressing and you're putting your house in order here. And we are learning, we are watching, we are looking at. PINA will take this and apply them to other members as well.
What would happen tomorrow, this is for you two gentlemen, if the media decree were to be removed? Let's hear from you first, Ashwin.
Okay. There are several ways in which we can sort of, address this problem. I mean, to me, I just want to say that the exclusive focus on the media decree and the penal liabilities is like, drunk people looking for keys under the streetlight. And it was politically convenient, in the sort of the backdrop of 2006 and so on and so forth. We need to, come to terms with the fact that the political landscape is shifting dramatically. We now have a parliamentary democracy, sort of full functioning parliamentary democracy in place. We also have a very, very robust Bill of Rights in our constitution. So if you look at the provisions of the Media Industry Development Decree, I've always insisted, because I'm not a trained lawyer, that it needs to be read contrapunentally against the provisions of the 2013 Constitution, which is about freedom of the press and so on and so forth. So it's about, putting these things to test. And so I think that just, offering this kind of lugubrious consolation that, we have the decree, let me finish. Yeah, we have the decree and, we can't do much around it, blah, blah, is not enough. You have to put the Constitution to test. The other thing, of course, is the role of development.
I'm so sorry.
Right?
We can continue, but it's time for a break.
Oh,
we have to take a break. We'll be right back. Welcome back. We're into the last segment of the show tonight. Ashwin, you were making a point before the break about reading the media decree or matching that with the Constitution. Let me put this question to you. Would you support a review of the media decree in line with removing or reducing the penalties? Because based on the discussions tonight, based on what's being said, that is the main gripe of most of the journalists, the fear, the most common fear of journalists. Would you support a review of the penalties?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that no laws are set in stone. The counter argument would be that the penal liabilities serve as a deterrent. But at the same time, I think that, I mean, the whole ethos of democracy is about, you know, subjecting our laws to review to see whether it, you know, is conducive to the historical political conjuncture that we find ourselves in, and, you know, whether it is an archaic piece of law, whether it's anachronistic, and so the whole idea of democracy is for, you know, a multitude of actors to have a say about a piece of legislation that governs everybody's lives, you know, in the industry. So, you know, absolutely, I don't think anything is set in stone, and so we shouldn't just say that, you know, this is a life sentence. But at the same time, I mean, while, you know, and that is the prerogative of the parliament and all that, we should focus on the issue of development and see the ways in which the industry can be developed in a number of areas, Edwin. One is, you know, a serious amount of training around the question of code of ethics, and you know, and the ways in which we address issues of you know, freedom of expression. You know, for instance, I mean, and the other is a huge discussion and a very honest discussion, because so far the question of media freedom has been highly politicized, and we've had a very, very sort of kind of narrow parochial perspective on it. But if you look at what's happening with the UK, what's happening with the recent call by the UN, you know, because you know, tabloid had called an immigrant a cockroach. You know, so where does one draw the line in terms of hate speech and so on and so forth? We need to have that kind of discussion. The third thing, of course, is that we can talk about the media decree as far as, you know, it affects the mainstream media. But the reality is that most of the discussion is now taking place in the social media, which is not within the focus of the media industry development decree. So if you talk about hate speech, it's thriving in the social media. It's racist, it's sexist, it's classist, and it's rampant, and it's actually done by people who are seemingly educated. I mean, why haven't the politicians come out and unequivocally said no to these acts in the social media? The NGOs can come out and say no to what's happening in the social media. So I mean, I'm saying that it's okay to, you know, to crucify the media industry development decree, but you can do it only so far, which is why I'm saying that we are like drunk people looking for keys under the street light. The larger problem lies elsewhere.
All right, next question, Ricardo. I'm sorry, the question I had posed earlier, what would happen if the media decree were to be removed?
Well, that's a hypothetical question. I mean, I suppose the idea is that the decree would have developed journalists, make them aware, and I think the code of ethics, which was basically the Fiji Media Council of defunct Fiji Media Council code of ethics. So that was widely accepted already. So I don't think that's a point of contention. Any good journalist, any good media organization should be able to accept that code of ethics. But I don't think, I think it'll take a while even if the media decree were pulled today, because you know, there's so many factors involved. It's the individual companies, the individual media companies, and their stake in the whole industry. So I don't think it's suddenly going to blow up overnight if it's pulled out.
Let me diverge a bit here. One of the fundamental pillars of development journalism, and we've used the word development, is journalists finding tangible and concrete solutions to development issues, as opposed to merely reporting.
Yes.
There are implications, of course, in terms of human resource management and training and analysis, as opposed to just reporting the facts.
Sure.
How do you see that playing out in the media landscape currently in the next few years?
I think Ricardo, if I may, the industry is bereft of investigative journalism, and there's so much that needs to be done in that area. For instance, I mean, if you look at the discourse on development, right, where we uncritically think of economic growth as development, there's serious discussions to be had. You know, for instance, the debate we're going to have on PESA. we can have some series of very, very detailed sort of kind of investigative, work done on the implications of this for ordinary folks. We need to have some robust discussion about the Constitution, because for the longest time the media was caught with and obsessed with political identities. But given the fact that the Constitution and the Bill of Rights talks about social and economic rights, we could do some series of very, very interesting pieces about, what does this actually mean? What does social and economic rights mean? And how would it translate? And so the media can play a fundamental role in terms of, critically evaluating some of the things that are happening around us. Because sometimes when we think about things like globalization, when we think about, economic policies, when we think about sort of kind of, labor militancy, we think about it in terms of, something which exists out there in the global south, and somehow the other, we're somehow the other, in a vacuum. And I think that what the media can do is bring that kind of comparative learning.
All right.
Back to Fiji.
We're just about at the end of the show. Last question, very quickly. How closely does the FMA work with MIDA? Has there been any association, any discussion?
Yes, there have been. We've had a few discussions. In January, we met with the editors, and the editors met in their capacity as editors of the organizations, and we had a fruitful discussion with Ashwin and the media in his capacity as the chairman of the Media Authority. There was a lot of issues laid on the table, and I think that was the first time in my experience that we've been able to say these are the concerns that our staff and our members have, and it was a very constructive discussion which Ashwin and the authority has agreed to look into and address.
All right, very, very quickly, Ashwin, very quickly. Do you feel that MIDA is being isolated by the industry and the periphery of organizations involved in the industry?
At one level, yes, because we still seem to be operating with that kind of Edmonton binary opposition where MIDA is seen as an instrument of the government, whilst the rest of the media seem to be feeling the brunt of the government policies and practices. But on the other hand, the discussion is not about MIDA. The discussion is really about how do we exercise reason in a democracy? How do we reason without rancor?
All right. Thank you very much for that, Ashwin. That brings us to the end of our show tonight. I'd like to thank our guests, Ricardo Morris, the president of FMA, Ashwin, the chairperson of MIDA, and Moses Stevens from Vanuatu, the president of the Pacific Island News Association. If you have any comments or questions, please do email us for the record at fbc.com.fj. We'll be back next Sunday. Until then, good night.